So, before actually using Flexbox in practice, I want to show you the philosophy behind Flexbox and show you the main properties that we can use in order to build Flexbox layouts. So, what is Flexbox actually? Well, Flexbox is a new module in CSS3 that makes it very easy to align elements to one another in different directions and orders, and also to change these alignments if necessary, like for example for responsive design. And this works perfectly even if you have no idea about the dimensions of these elements, because the main idea behind Flexbox is to actually give the container the ability to expand and to shrink elements to best use all the available space. So with Flexbox, we can easily replace float layouts with much less and much more readable and logical code. And because of that, Flexbox completely changes the way that we build layouts, and especially one-dimensional layouts, because that's where Flexbox really shines. For two-dimensional layouts, there are actually better ways of building these, like using CSS grid layouts, as I'm going to show you later in the course. So for all of these reasons, I like to say that Flexbox is a true revolution in CSS. It makes our life as CSS developers so much easier. And there are actually not that many concepts behind Flexbox that you need to understand in order to use it. But what you need to know is this. So first of all, the element on which we use Flexbox is called the Flex container. And all we have to do in order to create a Flex container is to set its display property to Flex. Simple as that. We can also set it to Flex inline, which will then create a Flex container that behaves like an inline element. But I almost never use that one, okay? Then all the direct children of the Flex container are called the Flex items. Now, the direction in which these Flex items are laid out is called the main axis, which is represented with this arrow here. Then the other perpendicular axis is simply called the cross axis. Now, it's important to be aware of these names because we can change the direction of the main axis, and also because there are different ways of aligning elements both along the main axis and the cross axis. So just keep these concepts in mind so that you can fully understand how the different Flexbox related properties work. And actually, that's what we're going to talk about next. So the Flexbox specification defines a couple of properties that we use on the Flex container in order to position and align all the Flex items. And then some other properties that we use directly on the Flex items themselves. Of course, I'm going to show you all of these properties over the course of this section and the project that we built here. But for now, I just want to give you a very brief overview over all of them, so that you can get an idea about how Flexbox works and how many properties there are and how they work. Maybe you can actually print out this slide and use it as a cheat sheet throughout this section. I'm sure that would be really helpful. Okay, but now let's start with the properties that we use on the container. First up, there's one called Flex direction, which specifies in which direction the main axis goes. So I have here the name of the property and then the possible values it can take, where the first one is the initial value. And that means that it's the default, right? So the direction can go as a row, which is the default direction and the one you see in the graphic up there. But it can also go in the opposite direction and even up or down, which will then form a column. Alright? Now this is obviously much easier to visualize in practice, but again, for now I just want to let you know that these properties exist. Okay, next there is Flex wrap, which simply defines if the Flex items should wrap into a new line if there's not enough space in the Flex container or not. Then we have Justify content, and this one defines how the Flex items will be aligned along the main axis, okay? So it's important to know where the main axis is actually. Next, there is the Align Items property, which is very similar to Justify content, with the difference that this one defines how the Flex items will be aligned along the cross axis, not the main axis. So Align Items is many times used together with Justify content, and to me, these two are the most important Flexbox properties of all. And then finally, there is Align Content, which only applies when there is more than one row of Flex items. In that case, align content controls how the rows are aligned along the cross-axis if there's some empty space. So again, we're going to look at this in code starting in the next lecture, alright? Now, about the properties for flex items, the first one is called align self, which is very similar to align items, but for one individual flex item. So imagine, for example, that we set align items to center, but then we want one of the items to be aligned to the bottom, and so we can use align self for that, okay? Next up, there is order, which defines the order in which one specific flex item should appear inside the container. And this is really helpful to reorder items, for example, for smaller screens. And now finally, we have three properties that together basically help Flexbox decide on the width of a flex item. So with flex grow, we define how much an item can grow. With flex shrink, we define how much it can shrink. And with flex bases, we can define its base width. And there's actually a shortened property for these, which is simply called flex. And this one is actually the one that should be used. Alright, and all of this is of course much easier to explain with code. And so that's what we're going to start doing right in the next lecture. So see you there.